They told me I was half the woman my sister was. For years, I believed it until one dinner where I revealed the truth. By the time I was finished, their smug comparisons turned into stunned silence, because I held an $84,000 secret they never saw coming. Before we dive into this story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss a tale of justice. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. Okay, let's get into it. I still remember the sharpness of those words, as if they were etched into my skin. You're half the woman your sister is. My father didn't even say it in anger, he said it casually, like an offhand fact, something as natural as mentioning the weather. My mother nodded, agreeing without hesitation. And my sister? She smirked, as though she had been crowned the winner of a lifelong competition I never agreed to enter. The comment stung more than I expected. After all, I had grown used to the comparisons. My sister had always been the favorite, the golden child, the one who shone in every room she walked into. But this moment, this dinner table exchange, felt different. It wasn't just favoritism anymore, it was outright humiliation, spoken aloud, in front of everyone, like they wanted me to accept that I was a fraction of a person compared to her. I sat there, my fork resting on the edge of my plate, my appetite evaporating. I could hear the clink of glasses, the scraping of cutlery, the little sigh of satisfaction my mother gave as she reached for another helping of food. Life around me carried on, as though nothing significant had been said. But inside me, something shifted. A knot formed in my stomach, and for the first time in a long time, I realized I had a choice. I could continue letting their words define me, or I could decide, right then, that one day I'd show them who I really was. The irony was, by the time that dinner ended, I already carried the weapon that would undo their cruelty. They just didn't know it yet. Hidden away in my account, in neat digital numbers, was $84,000 worth of proof. Proof that I wasn't small. Proof that I wasn't half of anything. Proof that while they praised shallow displays of success, I had been quietly building something real. But that night, I kept it to myself. I let them believe they'd won. I let them bask in their shallow triumph, unaware that their words had ignited the very spark that would lead to their undoing. When I look back, I realized the comparisons between me and my sister had started long before that fateful dinner. They were woven into the fabric of our family life, as natural as breathing. To my parents, my sister was the standard, the blueprint of what a successful daughter should be. And me, I was always the shadow, the afterthought. Let me paint the picture. I'm the younger of two daughters. I've always been the quiet one, the kind of person who listens more than she talks, who prefers to work steadily in the background rather than stand at the center of attention. I'm not flashy. I don't wear designer clothes or post constant updates about my life online. I'm practical, deliberate, and maybe a little reserved. Some might call that boring, but I see it differently. I like peace. I like building things slowly and watching them last. My sister, on the other hand, she's the opposite. She thrives on attention. From a young age, she learned how to command a room. She's beautiful in that magazine cover kind of way, big smile, flawless hair, perfect sense of style. She was the girl who won homecoming queen, who always had a boyfriend, who could charm teachers into giving her an extension on an assignment just by batting her eyelashes. She knew she was adored, and she leaned into it. My parents adored her too. To them, she was living proof that they'd done something right as parents. She was their pride, their talking point at dinner parties, their golden ticket to bragging rights. Did you hear about her new promotion? She just bought herself a new purse, real leather. Not one of those knockoffs. She's planning another vacation to Europe. Their voices would swell with pride when they spoke about her, as if every accomplishment of hers reflected directly on them. And then, of course, there was me. I wasn't a failure by any stretch of the imagination. I worked hard. I had a stable job. I paid my bills on time. I stayed out of trouble. But none of that seemed to count for much in my parents' eyes. My steady progress looked small compared to my sister's glamorous life. If she sparkled like champagne, I was a glass of water, necessary, dependable, but unremarkable. The favoritism wasn't subtle, either. When we were children, she was the one who got the new clothes while I wore her hand-me-downs. At birthdays, her gifts were wrapped in glossy paper with satin ribbons, while mine came in simpler boxes. At dinner, my parents would ask her endless questions about her day, her friends, her plans, while my updates were met with distracted nods. The thing is, I learned to live with it. I told myself it didn't matter. I built my own quiet routines, invested in myself, and worked on projects that gave me purpose even if no one else cared. Outwardly, I accepted my role as the lesser daughter. Inwardly, though, the cracks had been forming for years. The first warning signs that things were worse than I admitted came in subtle moments, like the time my sister flaunted her new luxury purse at Thanksgiving, and my mom sighed, "Oh, sweetheart, if only you could learn a bit of style from her." Or the day my dad offhandedly said, "Don't worry, your sister will take care of us when we're old," as though I were incapable of ever providing for anyone. Those comments piled up like bricks, building a wall between me and them. Still, I swallowed my hurt and carried on, because, truth be told, I had a secret. While they were busy praising her flashy purchases and chasing the illusion of success, I was building something else entirely. My own kind of success. Quiet, yes. Invisible, maybe, but real. And though they couldn't see it yet, I knew the day would come when it would all come to light. At that point, though, my parents' favoritism wasn't just background noise, it was the lens through which they viewed every part of our lives. They saw her as the prize and me as the consolation. And that was the world we lived in. Until the night everything shifted. The dinner started like so many others. My parents had invited us all over, eager to showcase yet another of my sister's so-called accomplishments. I already knew how the evening would unfold before I even walked through the door. She would sit in the spotlight, basking in their admiration, while I sat quietly on the sidelines, ignored or dismissed. The dining room was warm, the table set with my mother's best china, candles flickering in their glass holders. My father poured wine with an air of celebration, already laughing at something my sister had said before I even took my seat. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic butter filled the air, but instead of making me hungry, it reminded me of all the other nights I'd sat at that table, bracing myself for the performance that would follow. And right on cue, the show began. My sister launched into a story about her latest vacation, this time to Italy. She described the villas she stayed in, the wine tastings, the shopping. Every detail dripped with extravagance. My mother leaned forward, her chin resting in her hand, her eyes glowing with admiration. My father chuckled approvingly, shaking his head as if to say, "That's our girl." I listened silently, pushing a piece of potato around my plate, until my mother turned to me briefly, almost as an afterthought. "So, what's new with you, dear?" she asked. For a moment, my heart lifted. It was rare for them to ask. I smiled faintly and began, "Actually, I had some good news at work recently. But before I could finish, my father laughed, waving his hand dismissively. "Oh, sweetheart, you'll never measure up to your sister. That's just the truth. You're half the woman she is." The words landed with a thud in my chest. My fork slipped from my fingers and clattered against the plate. My face burned hot, though I sat perfectly still, forcing myself not to react. I glanced at my sister, and of course, she was smirking, twirling her wine glass between her fingers like a trophy. I wanted to say something, to defend myself, to stand up and shout that they were wrong. But the words stuck in my throat, caught between rage and heartbreak. I could only sit there, my body stiff, my pulse hammering in my ears, as the weight of that sentence pressed down on me. It wasn't just what he said, it was how casually he said it. As though it were nothing new, as though it were something they'd always believed, now voiced aloud with no fear of consequence. And then my mother nodded, adding softly, "Don't take it personally, dear. It's just, she's always been the stronger one." That was the moment everything shifted inside me. The comparisons, the favoritism, the little digs, they had all built to this. My parents weren't just blind, they weren't just thoughtless. They had already written the story of who I was in their minds, and they'd decided I was lesser. Something hardened in me that night. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides a storm, and I kept my mouth shut. But in my silence, a vow took shape. If they saw me as half a woman, then one day, I would show them the full measure of who I really was. What they didn't know was that I already held the key. Hidden away in my savings account was the quiet proof of my resilience, my discipline, my independence. $84,000, carefully built piece by piece, while they dismissed me as nothing. And that dinner, those cruel words became the line they crossed, the moment that transformed my quiet endurance into determination. They had no idea they'd just lit the match that would burn their illusions to the ground. After that night, I thought maybe my parents' words would hang heavy in the air. Maybe they would realize how cruel they had been. But no, if anything, the weeks that followed only proved how deeply they believed what they'd said. Their favoritism, once subtle, began to sharpen into open dismissal, and my sister grew bolder, feeding off their approval like fuel. The very next family gathering gave me a front row seat to just how far they were willing to go. My sister arrived in a cloud of perfume and self-satisfaction, swinging a brand new designer purse over her arm like it was a badge of honor. My mother gasped dramatically when she saw it, running her hands over the leather as though it were some kind of holy relic. "Isn't it stunning?" My sister beamed, her voice dripping with pride. $3,000, but worth every penny. Real quality lasts forever. My father chuckled approvingly. "Now that's what success looks like," he said, loud enough for me to hear. I sat quietly, sipping water, dressed in my usual simple blouse and trousers. I never cared much for labels or luxury items. To me, money was security, not a showpiece. But in their eyes, my lack of flash made me invisible. My mother turned to me, her tone light but cutting. "You should take a few notes from your sister, darling. See how she carries herself. She invests in her image. It pays off in the long run." I forced a small smile, though inside I wanted to laugh at the irony. They called it an investment, but I knew my sister's purchases were financed by credit cards and short-term thinking. She lived paycheck to paycheck, stretching herself thin just to keep up the illusion of wealth. But to my parents, that illusion was enough. And of course, my sister couldn't resist twisting the knife. "Don't worry, little sis," she said sweetly, leaning closer. Not everyone's cut out for the big life. Some people are just simpler, and that's okay. The smugness in her voice was unbearable. Over the next few months, the pattern repeated. Every dinner, every conversation was another opportunity for them to parade her so-called accomplishments while diminishing mine. When she booked another vacation, this time to Greece, my parents raved about how worldly and adventurous she was. My father turned to me mid-conversation, saying, "Maybe you'll get there someday, sweetheart, if you save up enough for the flight." When she showed off a new ring gifted by a boyfriend she'd only known for a few weeks, my mother's eyes filled with happy tears. "She's going to marry rich one day," she declared proudly. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "And you'll find someone nice too, dear. Someone stable. Maybe a teacher. Or an accountant." It was always like that in my life, reduced to the role of a consolation prize. But the cruelest moment came one evening when we were all sitting in the living room, watching television. A commercial for retirement planning came on, showing adult children caring for their elderly parents. My father chuckled and nudged my sister. "We know who's going to take care of us in our old age," he said with pride. "We won't have to worry, thanks to her." And then, as though the thought had just struck him, he glanced at me and added casually, "Not that you could. We'd be broke if we had to rely on you." Everyone laughed, my parents, my sister, except me. I sat there frozen, the smile on my face brittle and hollow. My chest ached, and my hands clenched tightly in my lap to keep them from trembling. In that moment, it hit me. Their cruelty wasn't accidental. It wasn't thoughtless. It was deliberate, ingrained, and shameless. Every new jab, every dismissive laugh, was a reminder that in their eyes, I was worth less. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that behind my quiet exterior, I was sitting on something real. While they chased debt and appearances, I had been working, saving, building, and the weight of that secret began to feel heavier with each insult, pressing against my lips, daring me to reveal it. Not yet, I told myself. Not yet. Their arrogance was still growing, and I knew instinctively that if I waited, if I let them dig their hole a little deeper, the impact of the truth would be undeniable. It happened at another dinner. By then, I had almost trained myself to expect the cruelty, to build a wall around my heart before I walked through the door. But even with all the preparation in the world, nothing could have softened the blow of what my father said that evening. The night began in the same familiar rhythm. My sister arrived late, sweeping into the dining room like she was the guest of honor at a gala, her perfume lingering behind her. She had stories of yet another shopping spree, another indulgence, another win to share. My mother listened with rapt attention. My father laughed at every punchline. And I sat there, steady as always, cutting my food into small pieces while the spotlight passed me by. Part of me had become numb to it. I told myself I didn't care, but the truth was, every little jab chipped away at me, even if I didn't show it. It was after the main course that the moment came. My sister was boasting about her upcoming trip, this time to Paris. She made sure to mention the cost of her hotel, the brand of the luggage she'd purchased, even the restaurant reservations she had lined up. My parents were in awe, clapping their hands like children unwrapping gifts on Christmas morning. And then, almost casually, my father turned to me. "You know," he said, swirling his glass of wine, "it's a good thing your sister is around. She's the kind of daughter who makes parents proud. Honestly, if we had to rely on you, we'd be broke. At least your sister's a real investment." For a moment, time stopped. I stared at him, my fork halfway to my mouth, my pulse roaring in my ears. I could feel the heat crawling up my neck, my chest tightening like a vice. The words echoed in my mind. If we had to rely on you, we'd be broke. It wasn't just an insult. It was a verdict, a declaration that in his eyes and my mother's, and my sister's, I wasn't just second best. I was worthless. My sister smirked, basking in the glow of their approval. My mother chuckled, nodding in agreement, and I sat there, my jaw tight, forcing my expression into calm neutrality while inside me, something broke. This was no longer just about unfair comparisons. This was no longer about who wore nicer clothes or who went on more vacations. This was about my very worth as a human being, about my place in this family. And in that moment, the balance shifted. I realized I was done. Done swallowing their contempt. Done sitting silently while they chipped away at my dignity. Done letting them define me by their shallow standards. I didn't speak up that night. I didn't defend myself, though every fiber of my being screamed to. Instead, I stayed silent, finishing my meal with mechanical precision, each bite tasteless on my tongue. But in that silence, a fire was lit. I knew then that their cruelty had reached its limit. They had crossed the final line, the line that separated petty favoritism from outright dehumanization. They had stripped me down in their minds to nothing, and that was their mistake. Because what they didn't realize was that I had already been preparing for this moment. That while they dismissed me, I had been quietly building a foundation stronger than anything my sister's credit cards or flashy purchases could ever buy. I didn't know exactly when or how I would reveal it, but I knew this. One day soon, they would see me clearly. They would see me for everything I truly was, and they would regret every cruel word that had ever left their lips. That night, as I left the house and stepped into the cool air, I inhaled deeply, letting the anger settle into something sharper. Not despair, not sadness, determination. They thought I was half a woman? Then they had no idea what it meant to see me whole. After that dinner, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the words replaying in my mind like a broken record. If we had to rely on you, we'd be broke. My father's voice echoed in the silence, dripping with dismissal, with certainty. My mother's agreeing nod, my sister's smirk, they were burned into my memory. But alongside the sting of their cruelty was something else. A spark, a thought that began to take root and grow stronger with every passing hour. They don't know the truth. They don't have the faintest idea. Because while they sat around worshiping credit card debt disguised as luxury, I had been living differently, quietly, patiently. I'd been working towards something that mattered. For the past 2 years, I had been building a side business. It started small freelance projects taken after work, long nights hunched over my laptop, weekends sacrificed to deadlines instead of parties. There were times I doubted myself, times when exhaustion threatened to drag me under. But little by little, the numbers grew. Each invoice paid, each deposit saved, became another brick in the foundation of my independence. I wasn't flashy about it. I didn't announce my milestones or flaunt new purchases. In fact, I did the opposite. I kept my lifestyle modest. No designer clothes, no extravagant vacations. My money wasn't spent, it was stored, nurtured, multiplied. And the result of that discipline was sitting quietly in my bank account. $84,000. My secret. My shield. My proof. The thought of it made me smile in the dark. $84,000 wasn't just money. It was years of sacrifice. It was discipline my sister couldn't fathom. It was freedom from the judgments, the comparisons, the shallow metrics of success my parents worshipped, and suddenly, I saw it clearly. This wasn't just a safety net for me. It was the weapon I could wield against them, the undeniable evidence that their narrative about me was wrong. I pictured the moment, the smug looks wiped from their faces, the disbelief in their eyes, the silence that would fall when I laid out the truth. They thought I was half a woman? I would show them that I had built something double the worth of their illusions. It wasn't just about the money, it was about what it represented. Responsibility, patience, strength, all the qualities they had overlooked in their rush to crown my sister as the golden child. From that night on, my plan began to form. I wouldn't blurt it out in anger or desperation. No, I would wait. I would choose the moment carefully, when their arrogance was at its peak, when they were the most certain of my insignificance. And then, calmly, deliberately, I would reveal the truth. I didn't need to humiliate them with insults. The numbers would speak for themselves. Cold, clear, undeniable. And so, I waited. I carried myself as I always did, quiet, steady, unremarkable. I let them keep believing their story. Let my sister gloat. Let my parents dismiss me. Every jab, every smirk only made the coming revelation sweeter. Because I knew what they didn't. That the day was coming when their words would collapse under the weight of reality. And when that moment arrived, the balance of power in our family would shift forever. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Another family dinner. Another evening where my sister arrived in a whirl of perfume and expensive jewelry. Another night where my parents lit up at the sight of her. I could almost predict the script by then. She would brag. They would praise. And I would sit quietly, invisible. But this time, I was ready. I dressed as I always did, simple blouse, neat slacks. No jewelry except for the modest watch I'd worn for years. I wanted nothing about me to change, nothing to signal what I carried with me that evening. My weapon wasn't on my wrist or over my shoulder. It was in my phone, locked behind a password only I knew, waiting patiently for its moment. Dinner unfolded predictably. My sister was in full performance mode, telling everyone about her latest indulgence, a vacation she had booked to Paris. She described the boutique hotels, the high-end restaurants, even the designer boutiques she planned to visit. My mother was enraptured, her eyes glowing as though she were hearing poetry. My father chuckled proudly, nodding along like a man who had won the lottery. Now this, my father said, raising his glass. This is what success looks like. You've made us so proud. And then, with that familiar casual cruelty, he glanced at me. Maybe one day, sweetheart, if you're lucky. The table erupted in laughter. My mother's soft chuckle, my sister's smug smirk. The same pattern I had endured for years. But this time, I didn't shrink. I didn't force a smile or bite my tongue. Instead, I took a slow sip of water, placed my glass carefully on the table, and leaned back in my chair. I actually have some news, I said quietly, but firmly enough that the table fell silent. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward me, curious but dismissive, as though they expected me to announce something trivial. I unlocked my phone, my fingers steady, and pulled up my banking app. The screen glowed softly in the candlelight as I tilted it toward them. $84,000, I said, my voice calm, almost casual. That's what I've saved. Every penny earned by me, managed by me, built by me. No credit cards, no debt, just work, just discipline. For a moment, there was silence. My sister's smirk froze on her lips. her eyes narrowing as she leaned forward to read the numbers on the screen. My mother blinked rapidly, as if her brain couldn't quite process what she was seeing. My father set his wine glass down with a dull thud, his mouth slightly open. I continued, my tone steady. I know you've always seen me as small, as half of her, but while you were applauding shopping sprees and vacations put on credit, I was building something real, quietly, patiently. And now, here it is. I placed the phone flat on the table between us. The glowing numbers undeniable in their clarity. The balance might as well have been carved in stone. No more dismissals. No more condescension. The truth sat in front of them, undeniable. I watched their faces carefully, savoring the moment. For once, I wasn't the quiet one in the corner. I was the storm they hadn't seen coming. The silence that followed my words was unlike anything I had ever experienced at that table. 4 years, dinners had been filled with chatter, laughter, and constant comparisons. But now, the room was hushed, heavy, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. My sister was the first to break. Her smirk dissolved, replaced by a scowl. She leaned forward, her voice sharp, almost panicked. That can't be real. You're just making that up. Probably some screenshot from the internet or something. I raised an eyebrow, calm as ever, and refreshed the screen right in front of her. The numbers shifted slightly, updating with the time stamp, undeniable in their authenticity. Still think it's fake? I asked softly. Her face reddened, her eyes darting toward our parents as though begging them to rescue her. But they were too stunned to move. My mother's hands trembled as she reached for her glass. Her voice unsteady. But how? You don't live like her. You don't. She trailed off, unable to reconcile the image she had clung to for years with the reality in front of her. I let her flounder for a moment before answering, my tone calm, almost gentle. I don't live like her because I don't spend to impress. While she was buying purses on credit, I was saving. While you laughed at my simple clothes, I was building security. And while you told me I was half the woman she is, I was proving at least to myself that I was whole. My father's face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, like a fish gasping for air. Finally, he managed. You should have told us. We didn't know. I shook my head, meeting his eyes directly. No, you didn't want to know. You only saw what fit the story you had already written. That she was the star, and I was the shadow. You never asked about my work, my plans, my progress. You didn't care to. But now, you can't ignore it. The shame that washed over him was visible. His shoulders slumped, his bravado cracked, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. My sister, desperate to claw back her superiority, snapped, well, so what? Money isn't everything. At least I have a life. At least I'm enjoying myself. Her words rang hollow, even to her. My mother winced, my father frowned, and I simply smiled faintly. If debt and appearances are what you call enjoyment, then yes, you've mastered it. But I've built something that lasts. Something that doesn't vanish the moment the credit card bill arrives. Her mouth opened, then closed. No comeback, no smirk, just silence. For once, the roles had reversed. They had always been the judges, the commentators, the voices of authority. But now, stripped of their illusions, they sat in stunned silence while I held the truth. And the best part, I hadn't needed to raise my voice. I hadn't needed insults or drama. Just numbers, just proof, just the calm, steady truth that dismantled years of arrogance in a single moment. I leaned back, my phone resting on the table like a verdict. Their expressions shock, denial, and, finally, a creeping recognition were everything I had imagined. The golden pedestal my sister had been standing on for years crumbled beneath her, and my parents, who had so confidently dismissed me as half, were left scrambling to make sense of the reality staring them in the face. I let the silence linger. There was something deeply satisfying about it, watching the people who had always filled the room with comparisons and criticisms now struggling for words. My phone screen still glowed faintly on the table, that neat line of numbers shining brighter than any insult they had ever thrown at me. Finally, I leaned forward, resting my hands lightly on the edge of the table. My voice was calm, almost conversational, but every syllable landed with weight. "So tell me," I said, looking first at my parents, then at my sister, "if I'm half the woman she is, what does that make $84,000 worth?" The question hung in the air, sharp as glass. My sister's face twisted, her lips parting as though she wanted to snap back, but nothing came out. Her eyes darted down at her plate, then away from me entirely, her usual confidence crumbling into silence. My mother pressed her napkin to her lips, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She couldn't meet my eyes. For all her years of dismissing me, praising my sister, and minimizing every step I took, she had no defense left. And my father, my proud, booming father, sat slumped in his chair, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. He looked smaller somehow, as though the weight of his words had finally caught up to him. No one spoke. No one dared. I reached for my phone, calmly locking the screen, slipping it back into my bag as though the entire revelation had been nothing more than a casual note. Then I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and smiled faintly. "Funny," I added quietly, almost to myself. "All this time, you thought I was the weak one. Turns out, I was just the one who didn't need an audience." The impact was undeniable. My sister pushed back her chair abruptly, the legs scraping harshly against the floor. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this," she snapped, her voice cracking as she stormed out of the room. The slam of the front door echoed in her wake. My parents stayed seated, their silence louder than any words. The proud, dismissive expressions I'd grown up with were gone, replaced by something new, shame, and for the first time in my life, I felt taller, stronger, whole. They had tried to measure me against my sister for years, but now the scale had tipped, and not because I had fought them with anger or begged for their approval. It tipped because the truth had always been on my side. That was the moment, the single, undeniable turning point when I knew the old story was finished. The lesser daughter they had mocked was gone, replaced by the woman who held their silence in the palm of her hand. The days after that dinner were strangely quiet. For years, my phone had been filled with calls and messages from my parents, updates about my sister's latest success, invitations to dinners where I was little more than a prop in her spotlight. But suddenly, the updates stopped. The invitations grew fewer. It was as if the balance of power had shifted, and no one quite knew how to navigate it. When I did see my parents again, something had changed in their tone. The superiority that once laced every word was gone. My father, who had so confidently declared me half the woman my sister was, now spoke to me with caution, even respect. My mother, who had once praised my sister's every purchase as if it were a crown jewel, now asked polite questions about my work, my plans, my life. It wasn't warm, not at first, but it was different. And for me, that difference was enough. My sister, on the other hand, couldn't face me. For weeks, she avoided me entirely. When we did cross paths at family gatherings, Her demeanor had shifted from smugness to defensiveness. The sparkle in her eyes was dimmer, her laugh more brittle. She didn't boast about her purchases anymore, not in front of me. And if she started, one glance in my direction was enough to quiet her. She knew. They all knew. It's not that the money itself changed me, it didn't. I still lived simply, still wore my modest clothes, still avoided extravagance. What changed was my place in the story. I was no longer the overlooked daughter, the one quietly dismissed. I was the one who had built something real, something lasting, and they could never take that away. In the months that followed, I kept doing what I had always done, working, saving, building. My account grew steadily, not because I wanted to gloat or prove anything further, but because I had finally proven to myself that my path was enough, that I was enough, and in that realization, I found peace. My parents never apologized outright for their words. They never sat me down and admitted they had been cruel or wrong. But in their awkward silences, in their sudden attempts to ask about my life, in the way their praise for my sister dimmed ever so slightly, I found all the apology I needed. The wound their favoritism had left on me would never disappear entirely, but what had once been an ache turned into a scar, a mark of resilience rather than weakness. Because in the end, their words had pushed me to prove something I might never have revealed otherwise. And that night at dinner? That was the turning point, the moment when their years of dismissal collapsed. Under the weight of my truth, I walked away not just with my savings intact, but with something far more valuable: dignity, independence, a quiet strength they could no longer deny. The lesson, at least for me, was clear. Success isn't about the glitter you flash in front of others. It isn't about credit cards, vacations, or showpieces. Real success is steady. It's built in silence. And when the time is right, it speaks louder than any insult ever could. So yes, my parents once told me I was half the woman my sister was. But by the end of it all, I stood taller, stronger, and more complete than they had ever imagined. And in that truth, I finally found freedom. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.